This is going to be fun, Kelly. I haven't done many of these with people that I know or
Sweet.
or who know me
Right.
somewhat, and we can get into that as well. But Kelly Saxton, happy to have you here.
Thank you.
It's also I think the first episode we've done with an athletic trainer.
Even better.
So it'll be nice to get that angle, that perspective as well about a couple things. We have spent the last 2 days talking about teaching, creating content on joint by joint mobilization was
Yes.
one, and cranial sacral
Cranial sacral.
therapy, which is maybe the more interesting one for me to talk about, and because I told you I've experienced it with success, so I am definitely not a naysayer when it comes to cranial sacral therapy. I'm just intrigued and want to understand, want to learn more, and spending a day with you talking about it nonstop, I think has definitely helped me at least grasp a few concepts, which I'll pick your brain about a little bit. But the one thing I'm most excited about, which is the first thing I asked you when I saw you 2 days ago, was what shoes you were wearing, because I immediately noticed that they were slightly weird.
They are slightly weird.
And it's very rare when I see a fellow wide toe box shoe walking amongst us. So it is very nice. So what got you into that?
I started working with a personal trainer a couple times a month, and she was giving me hell about my shoes and that I really wasn't getting the positions that she wanted because I was in too high of a rise shoe. And I fought it for a long time because I was getting free swag when I was at Penn State.
Nikes. Yeah.
And I had a whole lot of shoes that I hadn't worn in my closet, and I didn't see the point of going out and buying. So I broke down and finally went and picked out a pair per her suggestion, and actually trying on her shoes at the gym because we were the same size, and seeing how expensive shoes are, because I hadn't bought shoes ever, I don't think. My parents bought them for me as a teenager, and then as soon as I entered college, I was working with sports teams and I had to wear their gear. So seeing how expensive wide toe box shoes were, between, you're looking at the higher end ones, $180, $200. Well, I'm not going to spend $200 on a pair of shoes. So I found Wittens, and I was really intrigued. So I got a pair, and they are the only shoe that I will wear. I've tried probably 4 or 5 different brands at this point, and
Interesting.
Wittens are awesome. I like the tread. They're a little bit sticky on the ground.
They have a bit more soul to them too.
They have more of a sole. Obviously, the wide toe box.
SOLE.
Yes. And the zero rise was a game changer for me, even from back pain to force production, because I do quite a bit of weightlifting. My gait, I could actually see that my calves were more developed after wearing Wittens, which is a little bit vain, but I was pretty excited about that. I've even tried regular tennis shoes that are wide toe box, and I don't want them. It's kind of hard to play silly games like pickleball and Wittens because there's not a lot of cushion there, but that's where it's at for me.
Yeah, but you don't see yourself like wearing anything else. Could you go back to a non-wide?
No, there's no way.
Toe box?
No way. And I've even looked for dress shoes that are wide toe box, and they're kind of hard to find. So
I know. So again, it seems like every time I listen to something about the history of sneaker, tennis shoe development, fashion, it all comes down to fashion.
The pointiness.
The pointiness.
Yeah.
Which again completely makes sense, because even to me, when I see pictures of myself in the wide shoe toe boxes,
ducks walking
yeah,
around.
they look a bit stupid. But you get used to them, and the people around you get used to them,
Yeah. So you talk about dress shoes. Women have an easier time because they can just go open toe shoe. So, but finding like a work boot that has a wider toe box, that's my next journey, because we're creeping up on winter time, and
I have some
having to
suggestions.
do
I'll
chores
see.
and
I'll
such.
tell you why I have some suggestions, because my older brother, he'll never touch a barefoot shoe or a wide toe box shoe.
Right.
No way, because he wears boots. only.
Yeah.
So me and my younger brother went on a mission to
Yes.
find something suitable. So we're saving it for Christmas. So I have a couple on the
Right.
list that I'll share with you. But it was the first thing that I asked you, and
Yeah.
I did get excited, and I did say that I ordered my first Wittens.
Yes.
I was pronouncing it Whitens.
Okay.
Until,
I know maybe you're doing it correctly. I don't know.
I'm usually wrong when
One of us will
I'm
get
the
our
one.
wrists slapped.
We have no affiliation with Whitens.
The other cool thing is, like, that's the number one thing that I sell in the clinic are toe spreaders. And after working, especially with this older population, like the 50 and 60-year-olds, and
Yeah.
they've been in these little narrow toe box shoes for their entire life, and their gaits are terrible. They have no great toe production. They really need to have those toes spread back out. And historically, our toes shouldn't even touch. So getting to the point where you can spread your foot back out like that it's kind of cool.
Yeah, and also like wearing soccer cleats most
yeah.
of my life.
Yeah.
They're so jammed in there.
Right.
And you're even like, similar to nutrition, we were saying how you always preach a certain thing.
Right.
So also with shoes, like I remember always being preached, whether it's coaches or older players, always go half a size smaller.
Right.
So the shoe is a bit tight.
And you would think it'd be the opposite. You'd want that toe spread for more force production and control over change of direction and
so they
toe
are.
grip.
I know they are creating. They do exist now. Wide toe box soccer cleats.
Yeah.
I don't know how popular they are. I haven't seen
Right.
any on TV yet, but they do exist, which is pretty interesting. Did it the toe spreaders themselves? Do you use them?
Not as religious as I should, but
So what do you recommend, like in terms of usage of those?
I would start with like an hour a day, and then
Just slip them on whenever.
Yeah, I actually have a client who's been wearing them long enough that she will actually run in them. She has a wide toe box shoe, and she'll actually put them in her shoes while she's running, and
Wow.
she's solving a lot of mechanical issues because she has a wider base and more stability at her foot. My next goal is to get my kids in them because kids' shoes are terrible.
In the wide toe box,
and just like structure of shoes.
yeah.
It's the same thing. Kids want something fashionable. They want to look like their friends. So right now I'm trying to convince my kids that they need to be in something else.
So what took you down the athletic training route?
Well, I was an athlete. Softball, but my main thing was gymnastics, if you can believe it. I'm pretty tall and bulky for a gymnast. I was about 180 pounds and 5'2" when I was in high school. I was a monster.
So you say monster, but 5'2" sounds tiny to me.
About 180 pounds
Fair
at
enough.
5'2".
Yeah.
That's pretty hefty. So
So you were a gymnast?
I was a
That weight?
gymnast. I was fairly high level. I don't know how they do the levels now. I was about I was a decent level 9. So I think most college athletes are between a 9, 10, or on to an elite. So I was doing some pretty crazy things, but I actually got an injury. It's called turf toe, where you damage the ligament structures under your big toe. And that kind of changed the game for me because I couldn't ever come back to the force production that I was doing, especially things like tumbling or jumping off the springboard. And then it eventually led to a back injury, and I kind of hung it up at that point.
So today with the joint by joint stuff, we were talking about the effects of
That
issues
big,
with
that
the
big toe. And if you were to compare my feet, the side that I had that turf toe on is extremely arthritic. There's tons of extra bony lay down. I will never mobilize my big toe because it's too painful and there's not enough joint range of motion available. So actually the Wittens have helped with that and actually getting more of a high arch and being more mechanically sound trying to get around that big toe. I've tried everything from orthotics to rehab to whatever, and it's just a fact of life at this point, and I'm going to deal with my big toe.
So you almost gave up on fighting it?
Yeah.
Just living with it.
Accepted it.
Yeah, so did you underestimate, or do you think people in general underestimate maybe the effect of, like, if you have an issue with something like your big toe, how it doesn't just end there at the big toe or at the foot, or at the lower extremity,
Right.
how it could spread, or like it could cause chain reactions all over.
It's kind of a catch-22 because you could look at it from both angles. I think people care and they or would be interested, but I think time management is such a huge piece of everyone that's coming in, especially to see me. These are things that they've been dealing with for decades, and adding something to their plate. Like, I need you to do these 2 mobility exercises and that's it. I need you to add this to your plate in order for you to improve and get better.
Yeah.
Majority of the people are not going to do it. So are they really in that much pain that they want to address it? Because it's going to take them down this rabbit hole where not only do they need to do mobility, but most of them are out of shape. They need to get in and exercise. They need to do some strength. They need to take care of themselves as a whole. So for me, it's not, I mean, I'll beat you up all day, but you have to do some stuff on your own. And that's probably the biggest wall that I hit working with, even if it's an athletic population or the general population, it's how much time do they want to put into themselves?
And sometimes it really doesn't have to be that much time, right?
Right.
Yeah. Even me, I'm always exposed to new things. So even now, watching you, I think to myself, I need to incorporate a bit of this.
Yeah, you're not going to be yanking on your tongue in the shower.
That's the thing, Now I need to incorporate
Right.
ear pulls and tongue pulls.
Right.
Which again, I probably could spend 2 minutes
Right.
a day and tick a few of those boxes, and it should probably help me. But it's less the time. It's, as you said, like more putting something additional on someone's plate, and it's almost
Right.
like we look at all these things as single units equal to each other, and we can't handle more than X amount of
Right.
units to focus on and concentrate. But it almost makes me think, okay, by neglecting something, not everything can fit on my plate, but
Right.
by neglecting something from my plate, like tongue pulls, what potential damage am I allowing to build up over time? And B, maybe what benefit, I could
Right.
be, what unlocked potential is there
Right.
if I got some more attention to certain areas of my body. Like I remember, I don't think we really, as athletes, I don't think we really understood why we were getting these, joint mobilizations.
Right.
I remember them, and I think this was like kind of a consensus amongst the team. They felt good
Right.
in a way, because when you finished, you were you spent. It was probably the treatment that took the longest in terms of one-on-one attention.
Right.
So you felt like you were cared for.
Right.
And someone did move around and play with the range of motion of a bunch of your joints. So you do leave there feeling, better after sitting on your butt most of the day before showing up.
Right.
But I don't think we really understood why we were doing it. I don't expect also an athletic trainer to sit down and explain everything to an athlete.
In my opinion, they should.
So
Because education's a huge piece
That's
of
what I was
it.
going to ask you, though. But I don't want to impose that on you, that an athletic trainer should be explaining everything. But do you think we miss out when there's some some barrier there? Like even
I think absolutely, and that's probably one of my number one goal when even a general public person comes in to see me. I want them to understand why they need to do something or why we did a particular movement. I think the older population, especially if it's someone who's been through the ringer with seeing different practitioners, they've seen every surgeon and they're still not feeling better, and you give them a biomechanical explanation for why they're feeling the way they're feeling or why this particular movement at home could push them over the edge and finally get to that point where maybe it's more manageable. I don't ever claim to be a magician or to be the end-all be-all for someone, but it's almost gotten to that point where I'm the last resort for a lot of these people that are coming in, especially when you're talking about the cranial work. And I don't ever just use one modality. It's always a combination of things. So even when I was at Penn State, I wanted the athlete to know we're doing this for rotary stability. We're doing this for your posterior chain. We're doing all these prevention as a group because our ACL rates are through the roof. To give you an example, when I switched over from volleyball to working with the women's soccer program, I don't know if every other trainer was doing it, but I knew a lot of them weren't, going through the injury history and showing percentages like 35% of all of their injuries were from ACL tears. That's really terrible. 100% of their concussions were from hitting the ball. That shouldn't be happening. So how do you come up with a treatment plan and get the athletes on board? Well, they have to be educated. How do you get the strength coach on board? They have to be educated. So I would say that's the number one piece.
I agree. I can also, though, like, be realistic, and even myself, if I'm sitting down with an athletic trainer when I'm 20 years old and they start telling me about the posterior chain and all these things, I would respect the person and I would nod,
but not have any idea.
but just lay down and whatever happens, happens.
Right.
So, which I think is an issue, I definitely think is an issue. And also I mentioned to you how we were doing some work on like somatic language and somatic body work, which is very interesting. And then there we were talking about the fact that an athlete might come in for treatment for whatever it is, hurting their knee, having their knee treated, and while they're getting the treatment, they're on Instagram. Or
they're not present.
Disassociated completely.
Right.
So there's a bunch of elements there that are probably interfering with the healing process for athletes, right? And then another element is maybe you giving them some homework or recommendations, and maybe because of the lack of education, or whatever the reason is, they're just not able to throw that on the plate as well.
And an athlete's plate is heaping, and it's too full, in my opinion. They've got to figure out a way to make college athletes or even professional athletes more mentally available and have more time for rest. And that's a huge problem. And not dissing any coach or any program, but even something like cutting out community service and giving that athlete that extra hour to just decompress and maybe focus on something else. Why are they staying an extra 2 hours after practice to do community service? Like, I get it. Like, it's good to do things with the community and to build kids up or whatever it is that you're doing. But if you look at the grand scale of what a college athlete has to do, it's astronomical what they have to manage.
And again, I do agree, but I want to push back a little bit. And I think this does fall down to education, but not all, but a lot of college athletes, you give them an extra 2 hours, they're probably doing worse things for them personally than it would be to do 2 hours of community service. You know what I'm saying? So it's a difficult one. When I was at Penn State, I was invited to do this thing, a State of State, which is like, I'm embarrassed to say, a TED Talk, but it's like a Penn State version, a student-run TED Talk environment where students go on stage and
that's cool.
They share ideas. It was cool, and I remember, wanting to write a specific speech and to talk about specific points, but I kind of also, it's on YouTube, so I've watched it a few times.
Okay.
And I was, again, now looking back, it's easy, but I'm a bit disappointed that I wasn't able to to fine tune it and present the points that I felt so passionate about. Maybe I didn't think it through enough or have the vocabulary to express it, whatever it is. But one of them being is, we're almost like, when you're in athletics, it's almost like you're taught almost the wrong lessons, which kind of become like your modus operandi, in terms of, like, one example that I've been thinking about recently, because again, having that speech on YouTube will haunt me forever, so I'm always thinking about it. But one of the things I was thinking about was, we're like, they tell us now in life, you want to long-term, baby steps progress over time, not to judge yourself like by the hour, by the minute, by the weekend. But that's how sports is like that.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you have an injury on your toe, maybe the best thing to do is, not even think about sports for a couple months, do what you need to do then to ensure that the rest of your physical development and physical performance long-term will be good. But we always look for shortcuts internally, like even as players, as players, you don't really think about, something hurts, but that's not going to be the dictator to decide whether you're going to train that day or not, or try and push yourself that day or not. It's permission from the medical staff and or the coach.
And that's when things get hidden or things get blown out of proportion or coaches get mad. And yeah, I feel you, because the medical staff gets crapped on too because they're trying to look out for your best interest. But they're getting heat from above and they're getting heat from below because the athlete wants to play.
Yeah, and I've seen it.
Right.
So it's coming from the athlete, which is also sometimes it's a problem.
Right.
But those are lessons we've been learning since we're 9. You know,
Right.
Sacrifice yourself. You have to win on the weekend. You have to bring back the medal, the trophy.
Right.
You have to make it to a scholarship, to college, all these things. So so that's one example, and I can, with a few more years of thinking, I might come up with more. But it's
Right.
like one of those things that the athlete's plate is full. It can be managed better, and maybe a few things can be like switched out. You know, maybe a few things can be taken out, like
Right.
if it was community service or whatever it is. If you ask me personally, and maybe you'll disagree with this, but I remember coming to Penn State, and again, I've lifted in my life.
Right.
I've lifted weight. I wouldn't say maybe it wasn't good or bad guidance, but I've lifted weights before.
Right.
But then I'm showing up to college, and I have no experience in doing hang cleans. I have no experience in
Right.
doing deadlifts. I have no experience in doing
Big, scary
max
movements.
squats.
Yeah. Right.
And I kept hurting myself, not badly.
But you get little, what would you soccer players call it, niggles?
And something of not feeling right,
Right.
all the time.
Right.
So I felt, me personally, I was not ready for that.
Right.
And I could see kids who were way more frail than me or way more inexperienced in the gym than me. Also, these
Just
things
getting
thrown
crushed.
on them, and
Right.
them having to think that me and now they're a freshman, and if they can't hang clean perfectly a certain weight, then maybe the coach won't play them because they're not strong enough to represent the team in the Big Ten.
It is a heavy load to carry. I feel that.
Literally,
Right.
It is. So there's a few things like that always, it almost felt like we're not on the same team moving together, trying for everyone to
Right.
progress together, which is
And it's interesting to dive into that. Maybe, is that a Penn State problem? Is that a Big Ten problem? Is that a soccer problem? Is that a college athletics problem and where it is? So I would totally agree with, they need to teach more fundamentals with new athletes, especially even if they have done weightlifting. It's a very complicated movement, doing a hang clean. And I would cringe if I saw them doing snatches. Snatch is an incredibly hard movement to do correctly and not hurt yourself. And going back to the joint by joint, do they have enough range of motion to actually do that movement?
Yeah.
Yeah, or even a back squat. I don't know if you follow Squat University.
I do. Yeah.
They have a really great example of someone squatting with a really long femur versus someone squatting with a normal sized or a smaller, shorter femur. You can't do a regular, proper back squat if you have a long femur. So why are they not accommodating for that with high-level athletes like a Division I, Big Ten, Power 5 conference athlete?
Yeah. You worked with the women's soccer team, which is one of the best programs in the country. You won a national championship with them.
Woohoo.
Congrats! In this city, right?
Yes, actually staying at the same hotel.
Staying in the same. There you go. So that must have been cool. No, how was that experience? Also, again, even if they didn't win it, you were always close to it, winning Big Ten championships.
Right. So I came from women's volleyball, and this is, you kind of gave me a clue about what the last question's going to be, and this kind of plays into it a little bit. That timing,
Don't tell people.
that sometimes success isn't about the hard work that you put in. Sometimes it's timing. So I was very green straight out of graduate school and got literally thrown to the wolves with working with a program that was probably the best of all time, and working with an incredibly hard coach that was very abrasive, and being a green female, brand new to such a Power 5 conference. Working with that team, I won 2 national championships with them, but I almost feel like I didn't earn it because they were already so good. What was I bringing to the table that made them what was my contribution to making them such a great program? Whereas the women's soccer program, I put literally my blood, sweat, and tears into that team. And it was probably the best group of athletes as a collective unit that I'd ever worked with. They all were extremely talented from the top of the roster to the bottom. They got along well. There wasn't any girl drama. The coaches were receptive to ideas. I had some discussions about some things I did behind the scenes that I never told anyone that I was doing because I didn't want to get my wrist slapped for monitoring their load. Like, what were they doing? Really diving into their nutrition, making sure that X, Y, and Z was covered, and all of these huge injury problems were being addressed before I even stepped foot into the program. So I think that's what made that national championship so clutch, is because I literally put everything into it. I used every piece of my knowledge. I used every piece of my skill set to get those girls as physically ready from my job skill set that I could.
What was the difference, if you can point fingers at anything, between, working with high-level volleyball players versus high-level soccer players on the women's side, right? And you worked with swimmers as well. Was that men's and women's?
That was men's and women's.
So if you want to stick just with volleyball and soccer, we can.
Okay.
Because swimming's not a real sport, right?
They're all completely different animals.
Yeah, no, I'm assuming.
Right.
But did you notice like anything?
It's volleyball was really hard because my personality did not match their culture. They were die hard. They had to go to the end. If you weren't perfect, then you were reprimanded. I can give you like really silly examples, like this would give you an example of my character and the situation I was in. So we were on the road. It was actually Thanksgiving Day, and we had to have practice, and it was at some random high school. And these are multinational championship in a row program, and people know them, and they know they're coming to town. There was a line waiting outside of this high school to watch us practice.
Wow.
For me, that was nerve-wracking, and I'm not even the athlete. So I walk into this gym, and it's packed. There's probably 4,000 people there just to watch them practice.
Was that in Pennsylvania?
I don't remember where we were. But there was a drill, they called it the pit, where there would be a coach at each pin, and they're just hammering balls at girls, and they're doing the best defensive play they can. A lot of pancakes where they slide on the floor and they barely get their hand underneath the ball. A lot of really aggressive rolling out of drills because they're so low to the ground. It's a dangerous drill, and there are balls flying. Like, they are moving these girls as fast as they can and getting as much reaction out of them as they can. And I don't know if you remember Deja McClendon. I don't know if you were here for Deja. Anyway, she still plays professionally. She is a tall, lanky, just gem of an athlete. And there's two balls rolling across the court in the middle of this drill, and I know she's going to step on the ball. I know she's going to wreck her ankle. I know she's going to rock something. So I sacrificed myself. I ran out into the middle of the pit drill to clear the balls. So rather than be, courteous of this person who's trying to save your athlete's ankle or their knee, both coaches peg the ball at me. Like, come on, seriously? And when I'm scooping the balls, I do a couple push-ups to show it's okay that you hit me with the ball, but I'm really not happy with you. So I get up, and I'm just fuming red. I'm so angry with the coaching staff. And I go over, I start filling up water cups because my face is away from the crowd. It's away from the athletes, and I have a moment to calm down. And Coach Rose comes over and he pats me on the back and he goes, "I'm really glad to see all your training paid off." And I was like, "I'm really glad to see your motherfucking training paid off too." And I patted him on his big fat stomach. So, I mean, it's like stuff like that. Like, why does a medical staff have to be treated like that? Why does a staff member have to be treated like that? Because it's such like a high level expectation. But at the same time, you get reprimanded for that high-level expectation that you would literally sacrifice yourself to save this athlete, and then he embarrasses you in front of 4,000 people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely, and it's a I've always felt that every team I played on, every single team, every single age,
Right.
it's like there's a there's no like malicious intent. I never felt, but there was always like the players want on the this is the guy's side. I can only speak about the guy's side.
Yeah.
Players always wanted to make sure that the person who's it could be at some teams it was a masseuse, at some teams it was an athletic trainer, a physio, but players wanted to make sure that the power hierarchy is in place, and the player is above the medical staff, and the coach is the catalyst for that, because the coach is the one that treats the person who's on the medical staff with slight disrespect, or a comment that's not in place, or doing what they did to you. Especially on the guy's side, it immediately gives like people license to do the same thing to you the next time that happens. Next time it'll come from a player, not from a coach. So I think the coaches are the ones that almost create that environment.
But with that said, Penn State won, I don't even remember how many national championships in a row for women's volleyball.
Yeah, his big belly was a pretty successful coach.
It was a pretty successful coach. But it wasn't long after I left. It might have been the last year that I was with women's volleyball, because we didn't win the last year that I was with them. I think Texas won. And I was actually really happy that Texas won, even though I should be bleeding blue and white, because that coaching staff was all about family. Their practices were done at 5 p.m. so that the coaching staff was at home in time to make dinner and spend time with their kids. They didn't do practices on the weekends. They got their girls up at an appropriate time for on the road walkthroughs. They made sure they had enough time to study. They made sure that they had a good balance to everything, and then they smoked Penn State, which was the exact opposite. You need to put your entire life on hold for this team. And to see Texas win with that family atmosphere, I was kind of rooting for them that Texas would win.
Yeah, no, it's nice. I get it.
Yeah.
I get it absolutely. And you do see those like beautiful stories out there.
Yeah, men's volleyball at Penn State is has a story like that. Their coach was always about family and made sure that he was at home in time for his son. So he made those practices around his kid, which helped out the other coaching staff and the support staff, because they were home on time too.
It's just created a good atmosphere, a good environment.
And they've won a couple national championships, but it's a different bird because there's less men's volleyball programs. It's a different caliber game. It's like comparing apples to oranges. Yeah.
Do you did you learn to like soccer?
Oh, that's probably the only sport that I would watch on TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, did you ever, because you were with a lot of female athletes who are playing professionally?
Yes.
Did you ever get a chance to watch them on TV?
I have. I actually went to the World Cup to support Rocky when she was playing with us. I drove to Canada and actually went to her match.
Oh, wow. So that was the what are we now? So like 2019 World Cup? Or something like that?
It was probably it was before I had kids, so it's 15, 16 probably.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about Dan Monthly?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so because I'll give some context here. I came to Penn State, and within a couple of days I tore my ACL, and it was summer, so nothing was really going on besides the training room being full with all the injured players, with all the players training over the summer, and with all the medical staff who were there every day. So from my third or fourth day at Penn State, I was in the training room every day for a good few months. And I saw you every day, and I saw Dan Monthly every day, and I saw my athletic trainer every day as well. Yeah. And it's interesting, like, looking from the side as a naive, athlete who just
and you're so young too, right?
I came in, I didn't know anyone or anything. You were very kind to me.
Yeah, because you were just there a couple of days when you blew it. So
yes, you were super kind to me and super helpful to me, especially in those post-surgery days.
Yeah,
which
those are tough.
Pretty horrible to be around. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome.
But then Dan was always in the room. His presence was always felt.
Yes, a
You
big presence.
You never really heard him say anything.
But when he did, it was important.
It's what it seemed like. So I never really like even communicated. I won't say with him verbally.
Right.
I got a lot of "Hey Danos"
Right.
when he saw me, but it's kind of where it ended. And you would see him like on the corner doing some weird exercises
stuff,
with the weird
yep.
things I've never seen in my life. I thought he there's something compelling about him. Just the way he acted. And I would see him like on his lunch breaks, taking his shirt off. A guy, he must have been at least 50 plus then, taking his shirt off and going for a run. So it was a pretty interesting character that I was always intrigued about. And then and we spoke about it briefly before, but I only really got to, maybe learn more about him was when coming back from the ACL injury, things were going well, but I just had this sharp pain on my knee that just wouldn't go away, and nothing helped, and we tried.
Right.
So I got the green light from the training room that I was allowed to walk into Dan's office, and it was early morning sessions because I had to come in before he started with his wrestling guys.
Yep.
Another maybe the best program in the country.
Like literally.
Yeah. I think he won his 10th national championship with it.
It's
or something like that.
enough to lose count.
Yeah. So it's pretty crazy. So that I was sent to this guy after having this chronic pain that no one can help me with, that even the doctors, the surgeon didn't really have answers for besides just wait and see what happens. So I don't know who and why, but I went to see Dan and I did a few sessions, and it was shocking from the first moment because it's almost like he didn't do anything to me. So, my parents would ask me, like, what was this therapy? And I did not have the words to explain
it's hard to explain, what
the hell he did. But it opened my eyes. And again, I don't know if I said to you because of or together with or maybe just time, but those few sessions that I did with him, which now I know were cranial sacral therapy work, helped because my chronic pain, or that pain that I was experiencing then for those few months, disappeared, and I was able to move on from my life. And I never stepped foot in his office again for treatment.
I was going to say, that's pretty lucky.
For treatment. So I was very lucky, and I have personal experience from a friend of mine on the team back then. He experienced a concussion.
Yeah.
If you remember that. It was my fault, the concussion.
Uh-oh.
I volleyed a ball, and I was okay at certain things on the field.
Right.
Scoring volleys was not one of them.
Right.
So I volleyed the ball in training straight into this guy's head.
Right.
It was pretty funny, but he got concussed.
Right.
He got concussed. But that invoked in him also like headaches and some certain emotions that just wouldn't go away over time, and no one could help him. So eventually they
finally got in with Dan.
Dan, yeah. So now I know, looking back, that he was doing cranial sacral therapy. I know even that just by I spoke to him right before I met you a couple months ago. I know that, and you can correct me, but even craniosacral is not really fair just to use as the term of like what he does, because it seems like he's going down these different tentacles to all different directions from craniosacral therapy. So before we maybe you can decide the order to answer this based on the relationship with Dan, or craniosacral therapy, like what led you to him? What led you to craniosacral therapy? What is craniosacral therapy? Because I can't explain.
So we'll start with Dan. It was actually my first day at Penn State. I had no idea where I was supposed to be, no escort to what training room I was supposed to be in. Eventually found my way. The door was locked. Surprise, surprise, because Dan's in there by himself working on someone.
He's an introvert.
He's an introvert, as am I, so we get along pretty well. Finally got into the room and got settled into where I was supposed to be. And all I can do is stare out the door at this weirdo. He's got his hands on some athlete's head and he's just sitting there. And this went on for several days. And finally I got the guts to ask him what the heck he was doing. And he told me cranial sacral. And before I could ask a question, he walks into his office and he picks up a brochure and he hands it to me and he says, cranial sacral 1 is coming to State College in 2 weeks. You need to go. And I was like, can you at least give me a hint as to what this is? He goes, no, you just need to go. So poor broke, just out of graduate school has got to cough up $800 and go to this class. But luckily it was in State College, so I didn't have to go far. And I just started, so I already had to take 4 days off. But I went to this course and I would come back and ask Dan 9,000 questions. I think this is the biggest bunch of hogwash I've ever heard. I don't understand why you're getting the results you're getting with this. Help me understand this, because clearly it's something important, but I don't understand it. Help me. And Dan has I love the way he teaches, because he gives you little nuggets. He gives you little tidbits, or he'll throw a book at you, or he'll throw a quote at you from this one person. And now that's what you have to run with. And you have to do your own research on the nugget. You have to read this book cover to cover before you're allowed to talk to him again. Or you have to go research this author and then read every book that author has ever written before Dan will talk to you again. So when I came back with educated questions rather than just, what are you doing? That's when our relationship really started to sparkle and grow. And I would say Dan is my number one mentor of my entire life. I would as far as go to say that he's a fatherly figure. And I'm probably the luckiest person at Penn State for having to get that relationship with him, because there's many people have tried to go down that route with Dan, but I feel like I'm the only one that took it hook, line, and sinker and had that relationship.
Why do you think that is, if people had the opportunity?
Because nobody took those nuggets and ran with it like I did. Because I wanted to know why his return to play was absurdly good. Why were his athletes just fantastic? Why was his return to play half of what would be expected? And like you said, he goes down all these rabbit holes or these tentacles and these other modalities. I could maybe explain 2 or 3 of the 8. Like, some of it is so far over my head, and he does such a tremendous amount of reading that I don't know that I'll ever be the caliber of clinician he is, at least at this stage of my life, because there's too many little people in it. But he was like an awesome example for a humble human being. Someone that is a workaholic. I don't want to be a workaholic. We'll make that fair right now. But he was never able to have children, so I think that was another piece that we bonded really well. I was more of like a daughter to him than maybe a coworker. And I think that's another reason that he's such a good clinician, especially with the sport he works with, is because he takes those guys on as his sons and really gets to know them, and he builds that respect. And it sounds like you were well aware of that because his presence is so big whenever he enters the room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But do you think that some people wanted to, but just were incapable of keeping up, of following, of, why? Because I'm assuming that this is for any therapist who maybe takes upon themselves something like craniosacral therapy. It's probably a lot of nuggets and a lot of reading and a lot of time and practice before
you even start to understand it. Yeah. So I think I said that in the videos that we've done over the last couple of days, is that I'm a firm believer in that 10,000 hours, that you don't even scratch the surface of becoming maybe an expert until you've reached that 10,000th hour. And I was lucky enough to be in a situation where I wasn't charging or billing for services like a lot of other body workers. And I could literally practice on anyone that entered the training room. And I was lucky enough to have a mentor the next door over, or even treating the table next to me or treating the same person, so that I could fully understand what the modality was all about. So I would credit my growth and at the speed that I grew at becoming proficient at cranial to that opportunity of having unlimited clientele, I guess you could call it.
to also to try and help, but also for yourself, your own development, right?
Right.
Just to practice and
Right.
understand. It's even this is kind of a weird thing to say, but even me, like every time I have the opportunity to touch someone with consent, I'm almost like I want to feel what someone's neck feels like.
Right.
In comparison to mine, I want to, just feel what it is they feel like. So you might tell me if I'm wrong, but does everyone feel different?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So not only like there isn't like a threshold you reach of expertise where now you can read everyone, but
Dan may totally disagree with that, because Dan is at a level where I don't even know how he does it. Different modalities call it different things. So from the Upledger Institute, when you're talking about cranial sacral, when you map someone with quotations, you would do something called arcing, where you're trying to feel the fascial system to the point where you see the lesion maybe in your mind's eye, or you can feel which direction you're being pulled with the fascial system. If you're talking about Barral Institute, it's called general listening. You're trying to figure out where the body is hugging the lesion. Like they may actually flex and bend and surround where the lesion is. So whatever you want to call it, how do you figure out that intuition through your hand of where you treat primarily? And that's, other than removing bias, that for me, that was the second hardest thing in identifying where the primary lesion is. So when you talk about what does it feel like to touch individual people, it's all over the board. I can sometimes feel a person when they pull in the parking lot. Like that person they are a ball of anxiety, or maybe when I first touch someone, I can, like we talked about getting whiffs with cranial, I can feel their back pain. I can feel if I'm doing a neuro technique on maybe a foot, I can feel the energetic pulse or the energetic buzz from a peripheral nerve. I can tell when that peripheral nerve releases by the way that the nerve feels under my finger. Does that kind of make sense? Touching a newborn versus touching an adult is much different. Their systems are much more lively and wiry, and their cranial rhythm is robust. Whereas,
the newborns,
yeah. Whereas you touch someone who has maybe an autoimmune disorder, it may be very dampened and very gentle, very very short range of motion. If you're talking about tissue in general, I can tell if someone's hydrated or not just by how fast they absorb cream or how well their joint moves. Jokingly, I have a guy that comes in, he's probably had too much to drink every single time he comes in, and his tissue is as dry as a dry sponge. And I don't know how much progress I'm going to make with him, but he keeps coming for some reason. So I don't know. But literally every person is different.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So how would you explain to, you're in an elevator with someone and you have 38 seconds to explain what cranial sacral therapy is?
It is a light touch, soft tissue modality that manipulates the central nervous system.
And the number one challenge is putting aside your biases, you said?
Putting away my bias. So especially with a sports medicine background, and other cranial sacral therapists may have a different outlook on it. It's almost, think of like a file cabinet, and you're running through this file cabinet of, say somebody comes in and they have low back pain. How many thousands of things could be causing low back pain? So how do you remove the bias of that file cabinet, get it completely out of the way, and then touch the person and be like, oh, well, their tongue is restricted on the left side back by their back two molars, and they've got their hyoid pulled to the left, and it is pulling their atlas out of position, and now they have a fascial pull down the front of their spine. How in the heck did I come to that conclusion? Just by touching them. So in removing that bias of people that would chase the pain and go treat the back. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's the hard part about trusting what you feel under your fingers and your hands versus pulling this file cabinet out and be like, well, there are 15 orthopedic things we could do for low back pain. Here's all the things we could do viscerally for back pain. This is what we could do from a lymphatic standpoint for back pain. This is, and then going to look at their history and be like, oh, well, maybe I am on the right track because they have a bridge in their mouth. They've had their jaw reconstructed. They have a history of concussion. They're a professional golfer, so they've got a lot of upper cervical issues. So sometimes I'll be honest, and every clinician in the world is going to think I'm a terrible person, but sometimes I don't even look at their medical history because I don't want to know. Even if I've treated them 4 or 5 times, I just don't want to know because I don't want that bias going into the session.
Yeah. And it must be difficult because when someone comes in, they immediately probably want to point.
Yeah, and I'm just like, stop talking.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool too from that perspective too, because you have to remove even the bias of watching somebody walk from the treatment room. They have a slight hitch on their right hip. They're not pronating well on this side. Their gait, they're not using their glute on their right hip. They're not walking with an ab on the left. Their head is slightly rotated to the right. Like there's so many things that you have to take out of the scenario before you touch the person. And I think the other piece, and Dan was really one person that hit this home for me. And I think every time we had a discussion about someone, he wanted to make this well known that we do not know the person that's on the table. You do not know what they've been through. You don't know what their upbringing was like. You don't know what the relationship is like with their parents and their family. You don't know how they talk to themselves internally. So don't ever assume anything about that person. And I think that's fair.
I think so too.
Right.
When you said the hardest challenge with craniosacral therapy is putting aside your bias.
Yeah.
I actually thought something else when you said that.
Okay.
I thought that you meant the bias of, that avoiding woo-woo types,
so the
pseudoscience
woo-woo-ness,
things.
right.
So was that a challenge for you, even before touching anyone when it came to craniosacral?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting rabbit hole to go down because I have had professors, you could call them professors, when I go to this coursework with cranial or meeting other cranial therapists or even talking to Dan, because I think Dan does take it a little bit woo-woo, which is totally fine.
Yeah. And we're just using woo-woo for lack of a
lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Voodoo magic is what they called it at Penn State. Like, they're doing voodoo magic again.
That's a better one. Yeah.
So I've had professors in continuing education. It's not just cranial work. It's along a lot of other specialties where they take it solely from that spiritual, energetic perspective. And then I've had very concrete anatomy physiology, which is more of my brain and how it works. I want to know physiologically why something's working. But you have to admit that there's a spiritual side. You have to admit that there's an energetic side. So where do those two marry and meet and mesh well together? I've had enough somatoemotional release occur on the table as a clinician and being treated to know that there is absolutely a spiritual component to it. But I think the clinicians that totally disregard the anatomy and the physiological side are the ones that are creating this stereotype for craniosacral therapists and almost giving the general public a bad taste in their mouth about what the therapy is actually about.
Which I get.
Yeah.
But even if it was dominant, let's say the modality was more, dominated by practitioners, therapists who do include more of the physiological side of things. Even then, is it difficult for someone who just finished graduate school like yourself, or whatever training they've had, to almost shift perspective or shift mindset and commit to a learning process
Right.
that's just very different than what they've read in the books?
It's hard. This is kind of where my brain goes with it. Looking at what undergraduate program or graduate program you came from is probably going to be the biggest player of whether you're a believer or not. So I came from an undergraduate program that was in my opinion, it was bare minimum. And I didn't know it was bare minimum going in. Looking back, having hindsight's 2020, it was absolutely a bare minimum program. And it was a program that was developed to create athletic trainers that would be appropriate at the high school level because there was such a need for high school athletic trainers. I knew I did not want to work in a high school. I didn't want to have working with minors. It's not something that I wanted to do that early on in my career. I would love to work with minors now. I would take all kids right now. But looking at that compared to someone who maybe came from a Michigan State University program where they did tons of manual therapy in undergrad, they actually learned a lot of the modalities in undergrad that I had to go learn on my own because nobody was ever around in my graduate program or my undergraduate program to teach me that skill set. Even in graduate school, I went to a really small university in Tennessee for graduate school, and I remember trying to teach myself innominate rotations of the pelvis and the sacrum and trying to help people with their pelvic position with sports. And I specifically remember getting reprimanded by my head athletic trainer because of what I was doing was not athletic training. I wasn't doing...
You have a history of that, huh?
I know. God. I wasn't doing stim and ultrasound on my kids. I wanted them to be more functional. And because came from a program that was very cookie cutter, and then I went to a graduate program that was very cookie cutter, and even something small like that wasn't accepted. Whereas if I had come from a program like maybe Michigan State, that's the only one I can think of off the top of my head,
yeah,
where they put a huge focus on more osteopathic techniques and being able to realign, body mechanics at a better position. And Dr. Upledger did all of his stuff at Michigan State. I have no idea if they even tapped into the cranial sacral stuff at Michigan State, but the kids coming out of that program, or even Lockhaven, which was pretty close to Penn State, almost all of their professors were PTs. So they were getting a lot more of a PT background than I did. So they were coming in as, graduate assistants at Penn State, and they had more knowledge than I did, and that was frustrating for me. So I was having to go learn these things on my own, read books, do this coursework on my own, tap into people like Dan, almost on the side, because I didn't want someone to know that I didn't know all these things that my peers already knew. But that's what really catapulted me to where I am now.
It seems like nowadays that it's not as, crazy to, seek alternative therapies and to try out different modalities. And I think it just seems like, at least, that people are less judgmental, more open-minded. Right. Do you think, does that include something like craniosacral therapy?
So I see both sides of it in the clinic that I run now.
Because just to add one more thing is, again, I think that, as soon as someone says alternative therapy, my mind, at least the first association is like acupuncture or like herbs.
Right.
That's what I think.
Or like weird tapping stuff. Right. Yeah. It's both sides. So I might have someone come in that's got chronic migraines and they only want massage. And I will say, craniosacral therapy would really help you. I'll give you as much information about it as you want, almost trying to convince them that that's what they need to pay for and that's the service that they want, and trying to educate them on it's not woo-woo, voodoo magic. There's actual scientific base and anatomy and physiology that go into it. And then there's the other end where I have people that specifically seek me out because I'm listed as a practitioner in the area that has quite a bit of coursework through that institute, and they will specifically seek me out because that's what they want. So it is both sides. And then, kind of like I said before, I'm not trying to like toot my own horn, but as of lately, it seems like more and more people are coming in to see me because I'm their last resort. They've literally tried everything else.
So they're more open-minded.
They're much more open-minded and wanting to try anything to get their pain under control.
So specifically with craniosacral therapy, we spoke about things like CTEs, concussions, whiplash, migraines.
Migraines, yeah.
can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
Just from the perspective of, and I hope this is tied to some degree. What really helped me, maybe, at least open a pathway to better understand the therapy, is you explaining the movement that really goes on in the head, underneath the skull, the face, the facial bones,
Right.
which is really fascinating to think about. Tough to think about for a second, because again, to us, if you asked me, you pointed a gun to my head and asked me if a skull moves,
Right.
I'd probably say no.
Right.
But it does. You're saying in nanometers.
Nanometers, very small movement.
And you have the ability as a therapist to manipulate or to work with those movements?
Yes. So we kind of talked about how I didn't really...
sorry if this is a basic craniosacral.
So that I wasn't a believer in the beginning because I couldn't tune into the rhythm. And I think it's like anything that you can train yourself to be good at something. And for this, it's a sense of touch. And I'd say the more and the more and the more people I get my hands on, the better and better that sense of touch gets. So removing that bias, trusting what's coming into your hands, and feeling that rhythm, being able to feel that filling and emptying. But for me, the really cool part is to be able to put all the pieces together and tell the person exactly what happened to them without taking a history. And sometimes I think that's the connection that pushes the client over the edge, that they are fully on board because I told them what happened to them without them giving me a full history. You were hit on the right side. You were hit at the eye socket. You also had a rotation to the left that involved a whiplash that compressed you on the left. My guess is that you probably were either hit with something or you were in a car accident. And I could recreate this moment of injury for them just by touching their skull and seeing what position it was moving into. So yes, there is movement. It's like a giant puzzle, and you're manipulating these little puzzle pieces to try to get it back into a normal range of motion, just like you would do it with an ankle or a shoulder or a back.
But do we know, by, let's say, avoiding getting those puzzle pieces into their correct ranges of motion or just general motions, do we know what effects that has on the body?
It's hard to say. So John Upledger, the creator of this institute that really ran with craniosacral, he died of Alzheimer's disease. Does that make sense? He's probably the most treated person in the world.
Yeah.
He should have no dysfunction within his skull or in his system because of all the people that have touched him and treated him. Why did he die of Alzheimer's? I'm not an expert on that disease. I can't tell you if it's nutrition or if it's lifestyle or lack of oxygen or whatever it is. I think quality of life, it's a big player for quality of life. I joked around that it doesn't take much to throw your skull out. Maybe you got kicked in the face changing a diaper.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, it's the side effects or the sequelae that occurs with cranial that I think makes their quality of life better. Okay, so yeah, we got rid of your headaches, but we also opened up your face enough that you can breathe through both nostrils with full airway, or we realigned your jaw and now you don't have to have surgery, or you don't have to have these teeth pulled, or now you don't need braces, or it's things like that that I think is what makes cranial a little bit more magical than some other things, and it's so gentle. You're not going to a chiropractor and doesn't feel like they're going to rip your head off because they're literally taking you to your end range. And
so from a patient perspective, are there any risks? Like, I can imagine going to a chiro, if a chiro is cracking my back, I can see the potential risk in that. But something like craniosacral, is there a risk?
Just the that we look for the big ones to make sure you don't have a bleed somewhere because we don't want to make your brain bleed more. And the other one is a herniated medulla, which means that your brainstem's coming out of your skull. And I don't know that I would touch that. We talked briefly during the course about one opportunity I had to work on someone like that, but the short answer is no. I can give you an example of where it went wrong for the clinician. I give you a personal experience.
Yeah.
And this is walking a very fine line between counseling and cranial sacral because they are completely different. We've talked about how some of that emotional stuff can come forward. What do you do with the emotional stuff when it comes forward? And this was something that actually happened maybe a month ago, and it still kind of eats me up a little bit. And I'm a little bit angry with myself for the way that I treated it. But this would be an example of where it could go wrong for the clinician, not necessarily wrong for the person on the table, because I think I did emotionally hurt them with the way that I handled it, and I've gone over it a million times of how I could have handled it better. So it was one of these last resort people that was coming in to see me. It was a young child. He was 11 years old. He had a concussion, which then led to a lot of gut issues. So we're talking probably vagal nerve system. He was on an incredible amount of medication. And this is where I keep a lot of these comments to myself, because me saying he shouldn't be on that much medication, I don't have the place to say that. His mom is literally doing everything she can to keep her kid from jumping off a cliff because he's in so much pain. As soon as he laid down on the table and I put my hands on his head, I could feel all of this emotional rage and anxiety and frustration. And when his mom initially came in, the second I opened my mouth, she just burst into tears, which tells me that he's not only carrying his own crap, but he's carrying his mom's crap. An 11-year-old child should never have to carry a burden that their parents are carrying. And he started to posture on the table. I was in his vagal system somewhere. I could probably be specific of where I was, but it's irrelevant. And I had this like burning instinct that I needed to ask him what happened to him. And he would not open the door because his mom was in the room. And I made the mistake of pushing because I'm not a counselor, but I felt like that was the only door that was there to open, that he had to realize that there was something else going on other than his gut, that it had to be put on the table in order for him to move forward. And I did the best I could approaching that situation with the skill set that I have and the dialoguing classes that I've been to, the dialoguing books that I've read, trying to take it from any perspective I could without putting words or thoughts in his mouth. And I could just feel his mom sitting behind me fuming that I was going down this pathway of this is an emotional problem, not a physical problem. And this was after talking to them about the vagal nerve and what the vagal nerve is responsible for and how a concussion could play into these problems, and then touching him and realizing that this is a deeper emotional issue. Where do I go with that with a minor who, if someone had asked me that at 11 years old, I'd been like, I don't know what they're talking about. And then a mom in the background who's putting her freaking every ounce of her being into this kid getting better, and then exposing that maybe this is an emotional problem that's probably has something to do with parent relationship or maybe a sibling relationship or some sort of abuse that's happening at home, without saying all those words. But I could feel his mom just fuming in the background, and I was like, I just lost them. They're never going to come back. When I probably had the skill set to help that kid get over his issue. So I don't even remember what the original question was, but that's there's danger in the clinician maybe going too far or taking it the wrong direction when you start to involve dialoguing with along with the cranial work, which is what Upledger loves. Upledger loves that side of cranial. You can be very successful as a cranial therapist without going down that avenue.
But you might be surprised in certain situations that you'll inadvertently pull out emotions
that or
out on the surface.
You pull emotion, and I, as a therapist, can open that door and let it happen, or I can shut that door and be like, nope, we're not doing this today.
So in retrospect, you would have just closed that door?
My door was open, and it seemed like to me that was the primary lesion. We talked about that a little bit in the course, that the primary lesion was emotionally based. This had nothing to do with an injury. This had nothing to do with whatever that it is that they were fighting. To me, it was all emotion, and it was something emotionally that happened to that little boy at some point. So maybe the concussion's what pushed it over the edge and exposed more of it. I don't know. I'll never know because it didn't come back. But
maybe they will.
There's no way that mom's ever coming back.
But what would you have done differently then? How would you have approached it today?
So after looking at it 9,000 times of how I could have dealt with that better, I will not approach that unless the child brings it up verbally or a mom brings it up verbally that this is something that needs to be addressed. It was also hard because a lot of times when you open any door with cranial where you are going to recreate an injury, because a lot of times with cranial, it's lining up force vectors. And when you line up that force vector, it recreates the injury and the sensations they had during that injury. So for him, we were wide open, that vagal nerve response, and he was squirming all over the table in pain. So I stopped the session at that point and been like, he can't handle this. This is the lightest touch modality there is, and he is dying on the table. I need to know what's going on, because if I can move forward with cranial, but we can do it adding whatever emotional issue is going on, it's going to settle his system down faster. And that's kind of where it all tanked and went wrong. So
it's a tricky one.
It's a tricky one. So I'm not going to push his body to the point where he's squirming all over the table. As a little 11-year-old, he doesn't know what's happening. And mom certainly doesn't know what's happening. Yeah.
Is that difficult, just treating someone with another person's presence right there, judging, looking, wanting an update?
I think for her, I kind of related with her. Like, if that were my son squirming on the table, I would have stopped the treatment. I wouldn't let someone do that to my little dude. So, in that instance, it was challenging. But I've had plenty of other mother, son, dad, son, daughter, whatever in the room, and it's gone perfectly great. So
because you treated me yesterday in front of a couple people, so I don't know what it invoked in me, but I was relaxed and fell asleep a few times. But I can see how it maybe can be distracting, also for the patient, maybe.
Right.
Because I feel like you do need to some degree, almost let you in. Does that make sense? So can people just lay there with, on the table and block you from?
It's kind of interesting. So
connecting with them.
It's interesting. I do not like treating my own family. Like, I just don't. I don't want to be in their space. Like, I know them well enough. I just don't want to go in there. So that subconscious connection is absolutely there. And there is a connection. They call it blending and melding. I don't like that term. That makes me feel like I'm in there mucking around. Like, I'm not supposed to be there, and I'm looking in doors I'm not supposed to look in, or pulling out drawers and seeing what they have. It's more of I want to have enough of a connection that I can verify that I'm in the right place, that the system is it's showing me that we're treating in a safe way, that I can feel what you're feeling on the table as almost a roadmap that, we are in trigeminal nerve. I'm feeling exactly what you're feeling on the table. and I'm going to know when this release is over because I can feel that the numbness and tingling has gone away. But at the same time, somebody like my husband cannot feel a damn thing when I work on him, and it's because I don't want to be in his space. That's his space, and we have too much of a relationship for me to walk in that door and kind of sit down and feel around. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
It's like what? It's like being a fly on the wall inside someone's head.
Subconsciously, I think there's a ton of communication that's going on there, and I'm just not even aware of it. It's kind of funny. I have a very large Russian population that comes to see me, and they are all about body work. They've tried everything, and one of the Russians came to see me, and we had a really great session. So they went and told the entire community. So now the entire community is trying to get in, and treating someone who wants to be treated, and maybe someone that knows the work. It's going to go one of two ways. It's going to fly because their system is helping with the treatment and it's going that much faster. Or like when I get treated and I know that the cranial therapist knows that I'm a cranial therapist, I'm shoving lids on, I'm shutting doors. It's like I don't want them in there mucking around. I don't want them coming into my space. So if it's somebody like Dan treating me where I would trust Dan with my life, it's okay. I won't slam the lid on him. But if I go to another therapist and I'm like, I don't know if I want them knowing any of this about me, I'm going to shove some lids on. It can go the same way for somebody I don't know. I can tell when they're putting the lid on the boiling water, when they shut the door, the session's over.
We spoke about how like someone could get injured, and almost like the pain. I think you gave an example of like someone falling down the stairs, hurting their butt.
Right.
But the pain won't go away because it's just because you're having someone's having an argument.
Yeah, there's an emotional component to it.
There's an emotional component to the injury.
Right.
And so have you seen like many of those cases?
So anytime there is what we call a somato-emotional release, it sounds like you've experienced something like that. That's the emotional component coming forward. And a lot of times it's not that it needs to come out necessarily. It's more of a recognition that it's there. And almost always it has to come to a point of forgiveness, which is where the dialoguing gets really difficult because you don't want to say, you need to forgive yourself. They have to come to that conclusion on their own, using their own words. I'll give you an example. You walk in a lot, at least I do. I walk in a ton of circles with this because I'm not very good at dialoguing. And a lot of times I just don't want to know.
But why? Just because it's better to keep some distance?
Because sometimes it's really bad stuff that comes up. Really bad, really ugly sexual assault, marital assault.
Do you feel like there's a component of people that they need to release it somewhere, whatever they're releasing?
So I can give you a really good example. Eating disorder almost always I will get pulled to their neck because of purging. There's a lot of shame held in the neck. There's just a lot there. And it's almost always, when you get pulled there, you can go one of two ways. You have to ask a safe question before the ugly one comes up. Have you ever had trauma to your neck? And usually eventually the dialoguing will go down, I've dealt with an eating disorder for X number of years. I've been in and out of counseling. I'm struggling with it. Well, then you go back to you need to go back to counseling. I don't have the skill set to help you with that. The other interesting thing that comes with things in the neck is a lot of times you say, have you had an injury to your neck? Then the really, really ugly stuff comes forward. I've been assaulted. I've been strangled before. And then you're like, oh God, I don't really want to know anything about this trauma. And you're trying to help the person, and you have this whole army of psychologists or therapists that you're trying to shove these people at, but now you have this subconscious connection with them and they trust you. And I do not give advice. I don't do it. I don't cross. I try so hard not to cross that counseling line. Yeah.
But is it like, and my previous question, I think, is trying to get at is like when you're putting people in a certain state.
Yeah.
So where maybe they are relaxed and they are maybe processing these thoughts and emotions now they're to themselves,
Right.
before there's any dialogue. And it's like, maybe for the first time in a long time, they're alone. They're not surrounded
Right.
by their family, their friends.
Right.
And now for the first time, or one of the first times, they're really processing whatever trauma, emotions is there. So it's like, and you're just happen to be there at that time.
Right.
So I can see how things can come out. Again, even me going through that somatic experience, I told you, for the purpose of the the course, the filming, the example, the demo, I committed into it.
Right.
I committed to Lara Colisar, and she was wonderful to work with. But I could feel myself searching
For an answer.
for something to let out.
Right.
Or something to bring up, or whatever the term is. But I was searching those files in me, and she was using dialogue and some language to kind of help guide me, maybe, which we also spoke about, because I think that's very influential. And she's obviously trained in maybe what words to use, what words not to use.
Right.
But it's also a very fine line, because how a word is said also can.
Right, you
very
can't
much affect you.
use a synonym, and you can't assume. So if someone says that they're scared or they have fear of something, you can't use a synonym of that word, and you also can't assume that it's a person, place, or thing.
Yeah.
So I can give you an example. When I was at a course, the word quit kept coming up, and the person that was practicing the dialoguing was assuming that I needed to quit my job. And it was brought to their attention, well, how do you know they're talking about their job? How do you know they're quitting a relationship, or they're quitting a habit, or they're quitting whatever it is? So you can't ever assume any of that. And it's really easy to walk in circles with dialoguing, because you're like, oh, well, tell me about quit,
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I don't know.
Yeah. But I think, like, if one is guided well, we all have things that we kind of want to let out.
Right.
So it's I can see how things can slip out even. People you're there thinking that I really don't want to know this.
Right.
But they might leave the room thinking, I can't believe I just said this.
So, they even say things like, don't tell them that they're in a safe space. They're going to know if they're in a safe space
Like
or
I
not.
said to you roughly 60 minutes ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't drag stuff out of people, because if they want to tell you, if they want to be verbal with it, they can. The other strategy is to say, you can say this, whatever it is that you need to say, but you don't have to be verbal with it. You can say it to yourself. You can say it quietly.
Yeah.
You don't, if this is something you need to come to terms with, now's the time, because your system is in significance detector. It's what I call it dropping. The system has dropped. You're in a position of healing. You're in a position to release. And if you are...
That's what I mean, by the way. You're in a position to release, yeah.
And if you're actually there, like if you're actually at that moment, there will be tremendous heat. There will be a lot of posturing. There's probably going to be some tears. There's probably going to be... I can give you an example. The first somatic emotional release I had, and thank God Dan warned me before I went to the course of what this process looks like. I had a full-blown, ugly, dramatic somatic emotional release in front of 30 strangers. I had almost no idea what was happening to me, and I shivered for 4 days. There was so much sympathetic and parasympathetic confusion that I could not stop shivering for days, and that's part of that somatic emotional release. They did it in an inappropriate way, in my opinion, looking back. They went too fast. They didn't find, like we were talking about, putting drag on the system and finding these little stops so that you're slowly bringing it forward and not a full-blown 4th of July explosion of ugly crying, posturing. You almost go to a place where you don't know where you are, you don't know who you are, you don't know what you're doing, and that's really unsafe for the person on the table. So that's why I made that point when we were talking about it in the course. If something like that's occurring, you need to get the hell out and you need to bring them back to reality so that they're not going to embarrass themselves, number one, or number two, really reveal something that shouldn't be revealed.
There's a time and place for everything.
And it's ugly. Yeah. It can get really ugly. And I don't let people get ugly. We go slow.
I wanted to ask you about the concept of like teaching our brain. I think, I don't know if you use maybe different words, but like going over the joint by joint mobilization.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what we're doing? We're like, maybe showing the brain maybe what it knew before, but showing the brain new pathways, new ranges of motion, new areas that our joints can reach without the brain being afraid or blocking those zones out.
Right. So I think we're incorrectly taught in these like PT or athletic training, massage, that we're teaching the system how to do something, the system being the nervous system, how to do something through exercise. That's not how the brain learns. The brain learns through your 5 or 6 senses, the sixth sense being proprioception, of knowing where your limbs are in space. So that would probably be the only piece of therapeutic exercise or exercise in general where the brain would learn, is through proprioception. If you're adding things like vibration into your session, you're adding smells, you're adding visual awareness, eye tracking, you're adding sound in a way that the brain is learning, it's going to lay down more pathways and it's going to lay it down faster, especially if you can lay down all 5 at the same time. And that's where that primitive nerve reflex stuff comes into that we briefly went over in the cranial course. So when you're doing a joint mobilization, you have shown the nervous system through touch that the joint can go further. And then you ask them to do something active where now the brain sees that it can go further through an active motion. So you've done it through touch. I've physically taken your joint through sensation to a further range, and then I added proprioception on top of it. What would be a huge bang for your buck would to do vibration, then do the joint mobilization while there's some flowery or citrusy smells in the air and there's some music playing that you really enjoy, then do the squat motion afterward. There would be much more lay down of that nervous system, learning that new range of motion than if you had just done the 2. Is that confusing?
No. Those, when you were describing the 5 senses, like I was describing the ideal environment for learning. Right. I was thinking, this sounds like yoga.
There you go.
It sounds like yoga. So the proprioception is interesting, though. I have this yoga instructor that I go to sometimes that he keeps saying to us, when nothing too philosophical, but if you don't need to use your eyes, close them in the practice. So like something like closing your eyes and doing actions with your eyes closed, does that count as proprioception?
Yes, because you're still using the sensation of your feet and you're using your inner ear.
But if you're trying to learn a movement, so doing it with your eyes closed will result in like faster learning, or is it better, more learning pathways for the brain?
So when you look at it from what I've been reading about the retained primitive reflexes and how to integrate them, it's specific colors, it's specific eye patterns, it's involving vision with more than one sense. So we talked about how the eye integrates 80% of the brain. Well, you could still do eye tracking with your eye closed. So I may do this person a disservice, but the person that I've been doing the most reading with and the most coursework with is Dr. Pryor. She's out of Nashville. She is probably like Dan level of amazing clinician. She is heart and soul into these primitive nerve reflexes.
What's her name?
Dr. Pryor. She works with children that are so far out of my league. Like she's having kids that are born blind, and she is reprogramming their brains so that they can see. She is reprogramming infants hearing that are deaf so that they can hear. She's reprogramming these kids' brains so if they have to have a lobectomy because of seizures, she's reprogramming their entire system to the other side of the brain so that when they remove that lobe, they are still 100% functional. And she's doing it with such freaking gusto and knowledge and love for these little kids that it's so magical. Whereas like I feel like so inferior, but like my goal with like primitive nerve reflexes is just to like curve past those learning disabilities. Like let's get rid of ADD, ADHD type behaviors that aren't truly ADD behaviors because this isn't an arbuncle fiber. This is a neurological programming problem where she's actually helping kids to see. Or if a kid is actually physically blind, she can reprogram what would be vision to hearing. So she talks about how your body can sense light. It's not just your eyes that see light. So these kids that don't have like an optic nerve, she's programming them using light, like red light and sound together so that they can see with their body and they can avoid objects even though they're completely blind. Does that make sense? So she's very scientific in, yes, that vision needs to be involved, but it's specific colors and it's combining it with another sense like hearing or another sense like smell that she's able to reprogram. So when you're talking about doing yoga with your eyes closed, maybe take it from that perspective that you are taking in light with your body during yoga and you're still seeing, but your main sense of vision has been taken away. So it's going to increase your other senses. It's going to increase your hearing. It's going to increase your smell, your proprioception.
Yeah.
Does that kind of answer
it
your
does.
question?
Okay. So does it answer my question? No.
No.
But does it lead me through a
whole
new
nother
avenue
rabbit hole?
of thinking?
Yeah.
I'll
Right.
definitely look up Dr. Pryor from Nashville.
Yeah.
I'll read it. You said she has books as well.
Yeah, it's
So-
10 Fingers and 10 Toes is her book. And it talks about how she integrates kids with this simple concept.
Very interesting.
She calls it simple, but she's so far out of my league. It's not even, yeah.
Amazing. No, I'll definitely look her up. Look, we've been doing this for like 90 minutes already.
Oh, wow.
I told you it'll go by fast. Still a bunch of things that I wanted to talk to you about.
Okay.
I probably spend too much time talking about barefoot shoes.
It's okay.
And yoga. I can't help myself. But hopefully we have a part 2 to do in the future.
Sounds good.
Hopefully we can learn some joint mobilizations for upper extremities.
Yeah.
It was again a pleasure to be with you the last couple of days and to do this episode with you. Again, I am trying to think maybe you're the second, but it could be the first even that I've done an episode with who I have some history
Sweet.
with. So
Good.
thank you. I know we never also met head on in any situation.
It's
really,
true.
but
Just kind of passing.
yeah, you were probably
in
always
time.
helping me, and I was probably just more to your plate in certain situations.
I was learning, right? So
But it was it was great. It was fun, and I think that again I've had a positive experience with it, and a good friend of mine has had a positive experience with it. And I have nothing but respect for Dan, and I have nothing but respect for you. So me personally, I lean to be open-minded about these things and to at least learn about them and investigate them. And I think I made a few baby steps just by sitting here talking to you, listening to it, and also looking at you play with all these brain models. Trying to emulate or recreate the head movements.
Articulate the idea, right?
So which I know is difficult to explain, and I'm sure you've looked at a lot of confused faces,
Yes.
And raised eyebrows. So I commend you for it. So well done, and I personally can't wait to learn more about it. So thank you very much, Kelly, for being
You're welcome.
here. This was episode 38, and you almost got me to end the episode without asking you
Without the last question,
the last question. So, is there something that again, it could be anything, doesn't have to be in your career per
Right.
se, or your practice, but that you've changed your mind over, that you're surprised that 25-year-old you, 30-year-old
Right.
you would never imagine that you would
So
change your mind on?
this might be a little Debbie Downer, but
Oh boy.
so I think I was raised my whole life that if you work hard, then there will be a positive outcome.
Oh boy.
And then this is something that I've been trying to harp on my kids. Just because you kick ass and you work your butt off does not mean that you're going to get a positive outcome. But you never would have had the opportunity to at least move toward a positive outcome if you hadn't given it a good go. So you are replaceable, you are expendable. So in your job or your life or whatever it is that you're working on, make sure you're doing it for the right reasons and not because you think that it's going to give you a promotion or it's going to lead you to a national championship or
Make you go viral.
make you go viral. So I would say make sure you're pushing for the right reasons and don't get bummed out when you don't get recognized for the hard work that you put into it.
Words of wisdom. If anyone finds themselves in State College, Pennsylvania, is it Happy Valley Body Works?
Yes.
Happy Valley Body Works. Kelly Saxton, thank you very much.
You got it.